This Family Life News podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you.
A real friend is a gift, whether new or long-standing. But there's something special about long-time friendship. I'm Martha Manikas-Foster, and this is Family Life's Inside Out, where we look at how God transforms His people from the inside out. Today, I'm talking about lasting friendship and what can get in its way with photographer, marriage coach, and author Dorothy Greco. Her books include Marriage in the Middle and Making Marriage Beautiful. Welcome back, Dorothy, to Inside Out.
It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Martha. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad we're talking about this. So Dorothy, what is it about knowing someone over many years and being known that long that makes a friendship different from a new friendship?
Intimacy, trust, and vulnerability, which at least to me are all really important factors in friendships, take time, like years. And that's not to say that you can't go deep quickly with someone that you've recently met, but I think having friends for a long time, and I'm talking about like decades, is qualitatively different. Because when somebody knows us and knows our limitations and maybe even has been hurt by us, but nevertheless continues to love us and want to spend time with us, there's something in that it's deeply healing, but also very moving. I don't know if you would agree with this, but I think being known and being loved is one of the best and most important parts of being human. Just a quick story, years ago, I think it was 7 or 8 years ago now, my father passed away.
Yeah.
And not long after that, I broke my leg, and I was on deadline for my first book. So all of this happened in the same season. And I couldn't drive, so I couldn't pick up our youngest son when he needed rides. He wasn't driving yet. We had a dog. I couldn't walk my dog. For the first few weeks, I couldn't walk at all. I couldn't put weight on it. And I was just all need. Like I felt like I couldn't do anything other than just sit in front of the computer and edit my book, which probably made the book a little bit stronger. But and in that space, so many different friends stepped to the plate. They dropped off food. They picked up our son. They came and walked our dog. And then even more importantly, they sat and grieved with me as I mourned the loss of my father. So I guess I just don't know how I would have gotten through that season without friends. And I think probably most of us could recount those kind of seasons in our lives where friends just really come alongside of us and give us what we need in order to make it through day to day.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned what it feels like to be known and loved. And I think the miracle in there is that somebody knows me and loves over a long period of time. Because, I know, at least I have a sense of the times I trip up. I'm sure I trip up more times than that. But the fact that I am loved, even though I'm known, is one of those miracles. Yeah. Of God's love for me as well as friendship. Right.
Yeah.
So how, Dorothy, how have you seen God use these established long-time friendships in ways that might be less likely in a newer friendship?
I don't know if this is true for everybody, but I think I'm a little bit slow to trust. I've been hurt enough times that I don't easily let people into the deep places. During the season that I just talked about, the people who knew me the longest were the ones who I could sit with and cry in front of, like really cry, not just with a couple random tears trickling down my face, but heaving, snot-inducing, crying, because there was enough trust. And then the vulnerability that I came into that space with and their ability to hold that space with me allowed our friendship to go even deeper, right? Sure. And I guess maybe second, I think hopefully we all have at least a few friends that we allow to speak truth to us or to challenge us if they notice that something's amiss. So I don't think that I would do great if somebody I just met, came up to me and said, hey, I noticed that, sometimes you can be a little sarcastic when you're talking to this person. And what's that about? Which is true of me. I can use sarcasm when I'm angry. But if a long-term friend, and we actually have several friendships, my husband and I, where we have given these people clear, like anytime you see us going off the rails, anytime you see us descending into sin or treating each other poorly, we want you to tell us. And that, I think, is really, really important. Years ago, I was with friends, and it was the second or third time that I'd spent, an evening with them. And I just felt like, wow, there's something really going on in their marriage. And I don't know whether they're going to be open to me, venturing in. That's a pretty dicey space. So I asked them, I said, I'm noticing some things here. Are you open to hearing what I have to say? And they both agreed because there was enough trust.
Mm-hmm.
And then literally decades later, what I learned is that they were in a much more difficult space than even they let on. And my willingness to venture in, and I challenged the husband, is what helped to turn their marriage around.
Wow.
So, those kind of things, again, like we have to do that really carefully and very much led by the Spirit. But I think that they're really important because we all have blind spots and we don't know what they are because they're blind spots.
Right, exactly.
So we need people to speak in.
Mm-hmm. Let me just take a moment to reset for those just joining us. If you are just joining us, welcome. You're listening to Family Life's Inside Out. My guest today is photographer and author Dorothy Greco. Dorothy, what do you think works against us maintaining long friendships?
There's a lot of things. I mean, just look at the political situation today, how divided we are. And how quickly we judge people who don't see things like we see things. So I think that that's one. Probably the second, and maybe this is even more important, is that we don't really like to admit that we're needy. Like Americans, I think in particular, really value independence more than interdependence. It can feel or seem shameful to be vulnerable or needy. But the reality is that's how God designed us. Like, no, we actually are needy, and the neediness is by design because it draws us deeper into relationship with God and with others. So, yeah, the polarization, the refusal to admit that we're needy, and then probably the failure to prioritize relationships because it can seem like there's so many other things that are much more urgent than that. I think one of the ways I see it is kind of like exercise. Like there might be, I don't really feel like going to the gym today. I'm just too tired. But then we go to the gym or we go for a run, and there's the sense of like, oh, I'm really glad that I did that, right?
Sure.
So with friendships, I think that there are many, many things that pull us away from the time that we could spend with other people, but prioritizing it, seeing its importance, and then being intentional, which I think is really, really important. Like we have to make time and space for these relationships to happen. There's got to be an intentionality about it. So whenever I travel in the United States, I always am trying to reach out to friends who used to live in the Boston area. And recently, I contacted a woman who had moved about an hour away from my sister when I was visiting her. And she was my best friend in middle school and high school. And we hadn't seen each other for 25 years. So I reached out and just said, hey, would you be willing to, drive down and we could spend an afternoon together? And it was so lovely to reconnect, but also to reestablish a friendship. So that kind of prioritizing and being intentional, I think it's a habit. Like we have to develop that as a habit. And if we don't, then friendships can suffer.
So Dorothy, I mean, given the challenges to keeping up with friendships, why might doing that work, because it is work sometimes, why might doing the work to maintain them be worth it?
There's Harvard University did a long-term study a few years back. I'm not remembering the specific year or the people who did it. But what it showed was that loneliness had the equivalent of smoking more than a pack of cigarettes every day on somebody's long-term health, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, right? And one of the quotes from the study said that, I may mangle this a little bit, but the people who were the most satisfied in their relationships when they were in their 50s were the healthiest when they were in their 80s. Right? So there's clearly something about spending time with other people, whether it's, doing something missional or just hanging out over a meal together, that really brings us into a place of greater health. So I think that that's notable, right? The fact that this is actually a study done. It's not just somebody's thought or idea. Like they've actually done a long-term study on it. So I think that makes a difference. But also, if we are people of faith, the Trinity mirrors to us what relationship, what deep, profound, lasting relationship is meant to look like, right? The perichoresis of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, always together, always loving each other. Obviously, none of us are going to be able to pull that off quite so well. I think that it's part of our DNA that God created us in such a way that we would be in relationship, first and foremost with Him, but then also with the people that He puts in our lives, whether it's our family members, our neighbors, people from church, whatever it is. And that the context of coming into deep and lasting relationships with other people allows us to grow. It teaches us how to love. It teaches us how to forgive, because if we're in a relationship with somebody for a long time, there's going to be conflict, and we're going to have to work it through. So there's something about that forging deeper into friendship that I think allows us to grow up and to grow into people who are more like Jesus. And at least for me, like, that's what it's all about.
You're absolutely right. So long-term friendships are worthwhile, but there's lots of reasons why they might not survive. Have you found, Dorothy, practical ways that keep established friendships growing?
Christopher and I are realizing that in this season, we're both in our 60s now, showing up is really, really important, right? Showing up for those milestone events that people, their baby's getting christened, or they're having an engagement party, or somebody's father died. We might not even know the father, but we know the friend.
Right.
So us being present, saying, we value you more than a free evening, or we value you more than whatever else it is that we could do in that time, I think is really, really important. So showing up feels essential for us. Not backing away from conflict. I hinted at that, but I think those moments when differences surface, all of us pretty much have the tendency to just kind of withdraw. And if it's a big conflict, it might be a slow withdrawal that's permanent. But rather than using that as an excuse to pull back, is saying, well, this could allow us to go deeper. If we have a conflict that we work through, chances are if we work through it well, we'll have more trust with each other. So not backing away from conflict, showing up, and then just taking risks, choosing to say, this person, I really like the conversations we've had. I'm going to take a risk with them and be a little bit more vulnerable. I'm going to share something with them that I don't even know how they're going to respond to. And seeing how the person reacts, and then using that as an opportunity to go deeper. So rather than like waiting for the other person to go first, is you initiating and you figuring out, what do I need to do to get the relationships and the friendships in place that I need for my life. Right.
So take that risk. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So move around your schedule. It's worth it. More than a free evening traveling to that funeral home, or going to be beside somebody in a difficult time, or in a celebratory time.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And taking the risk. And it's not always going to pan out. You can be incredibly vulnerable, and it turns out you get this stony face look like, what? Yeah. What's going on?
All right.
But I believe God honors those times. Thank you, Jesus, for the prompting. I don't know why, because it's not getting rewarded, but thank you for being with me in that. Yes. Wow.
And our sons are all in their 30s, and they have talked about how their generation is really struggling to know how to have relationships. They just don't get it. Our youngest son was telling us how if he's out in a social situation with people, we were talking about dating, and somebody, say, a guy meets somebody and he thinks like, oh, I'd like to get to know them better, rather than him going across the room and having a conversation with this person, he will text her. And I just thought, like, that is so bizarre to me, but that I think is indicative of how stuck they are in knowing how to have face-to-face conversations, right? So we as older people, I think, can show them, this is what it looks like, this is how to do it. They might not ask us, that might feel too silly for them, but I think if we mirror that to them, they'll see it, and they'll begin to understand the worth and the value of it.
As people who are old enough to have had long-term friendships, right? How do we model how to do it to people who are establishing friendships that could turn out to be long-term friendships? Right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you for writing what you write so that I could say, hey, I would like to get a hold of Dorothy Greco to talk about this. And thank you for talking with me here today on Inside Out.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, Martha. I really enjoy being on the show with you.
Thank you. My guest has been Dorothy Greco. Learn about her photography and her writing by going to dorothygreco.com. I'm Martha Manikas-Foster with Inside Out on Family Life.
Thank you for listening to this Family Life News podcast. If you've been encouraged by what you've heard, please share it with others and click the subscribe button to automatically receive future episodes. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Podcasts like this are made possible by your financial partnership. Find out more at familylife.org.